and so today was going to be SEPA and environmental checklist. That's what we have.
Yes, that's right
there. So these pages is 144 through 148, and the final page is on water quality, which we're not going to talk about. So what I'm going to do is briefly go over the State Environmental Policy Act and a little bit of the National Environmental Policy Act. Just so you get a handle of SEPA, has anyone had any exposure to SEPA in the past? You, I know you have. SEPA, all right. So we'll talk a little bit, get the kind of the context square, and then I'm going to pass out a subdivision, a plat that Todd Hansen is doing up in Tumwater and his SEPA checklist, and we can talk about it, just so you see kind of what it is in real life. That'll be real life. Yes. All right, so the SEPA, the Washington State's Environmental Policy Act 1971, built on the successes of the National Environmental Policy Act, is somewhat modeled after it. Interesting thing about NEPA is it's actually signature legislation for Richard Nixon. So it's kind of a fun little, I don't know, bar trivia or something like that. That a very staunch Republican passed the nation's first major environmental rules really, for all federal projects. So the way that NEPA works is that if there's $1 of federal funding in it, or a federal nexus, you run through this policy language. The interesting thing about NEPA is each agency at the federal level is allowed to develop their own NEPA rules. So they all do that thing different, right? They have to meet kind of the big high-level stuff. But Federal Highways NEPA is different than HUD's NEPA, which is different than DOD's NEPA, Department of Defense. They all have different ways that they implement.
Covers mostly pretty much the same.
So there's overlap, but there's different exclusions and which is, as an aside, it's pretty frustrating when you have, for example, CDBG money through the HUD. So CDBG's Community Development Block Grant Program. It's kind of where Congress puts help for poor folks, right? I mean, that's kind of the quickest way to say it. And it comes, CDBG is a program through the Housing and Urban Development at the federal level. And Housing and Urban Development is the organization, especially in the 60s, that was building big housing projects, Section 8 housing projects for low-income individuals. And they didn't do a very good job, so they took a lot of those things down later on. But HUD's got, and CDBG has got different exclusions than federal highways. So for example, one of the frustrating things when I was doing CDBG review is they would say, CDBG says you have to go through a certain NEPA process for putting in streetlights in a poor neighborhood, right? Well, federal highways in their NEPA rules said that's excluded. Like you do not have to do any environmental review for putting up streetlights in an existing right of way. So the frustration is there's no reliance on an agency that actually does that all the time, which is what federal highways does, right? They're building highways and updating highways. And so an agency like HUD or CDBG programs is all concerned about the streetlights, and instead of just saying, yeah, those guys are the experts, if they say they don't need to do the environmental review on it, we should have to do
I mean, that's true. They're more sensitive to the effects on sensitive uses like residences.
Yeah.
So
they all have
you would
different
be more
value
concerned if
systems
you
for
lived
sure.
on Sussex and you wanted to put a mega street light that shined into your house or something. That,
Whereas highways, they're more just
They
looking
catch
at,
that.
that's a road, that's a byway, if you wanna
Yeah.
put a light up, put a light up. Yeah, okay.
So you're right, Will. I
I
think
don't know. They just have
the
different
thing is that
focuses.
the values are different, right?
Sure.
But the frustrating thing from a practitioner standpoint is I gotta shuffle a lot of paper for something that we know is not gonna have an adverse impact. Which is
Sure.
what the point of the rules are. So we'll talk about adverse impacts in here in a second. So the state Environmental Policy Act is Washington's fundamental environmental law. And it basically mandates environmental review on a lot of actions and policies by all agencies of the state level and local government. So it's basically bringing in environmental review for almost, any decent sized project, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the exclusions on that. So paragraph 3, SEPA applies to all state and local government decisions unless they are categorically exempt. So that's kind of coming to that streetlight example I just used. In federal highways, that would be a categorically exempt or excluded project. In Washington State, when you do SEPA, which is SEPA, there's a bunch of triggers for SEPA, but you would do SEPA if there's state dollars or if it rises to the threshold. And probably the quickest and easiest way to talk about a categorically exempt project is a single family home, and activity on a single family home is not going to require SEPA. Unless you are doing things in a critical area, like if you're expanding your home into a floodplain or up against a steep slope that's prone to failure. That critical area now means you may be subject to it.
If you're gonna make modifications to like a historical structure or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
So I don't need an environmental review to dig an oil well on my property?
Well, that's not really like a typical residential.
Okay, residential use.
Use or like
Yeah.
improvement. Short plats, so that short plats are divisions of property of 4 or less are also not, they're also exempt from SEPA. So, the example we've got today is a 22 lot subdivision, that's subject to SEPA. There's also some categorical thresholds in every city's code that they can decide on. So categorical means in certain categories, and thresholds means at certain limits. City of Tenino can say, look, we are going to say that anytime you do a commercial project that's less than 5,000 square feet, you are also exempt from SEPA. So that means we're not gonna get to review traffic impacts, lighting, some of these other things. So there's flexible thresholds within a certain limitation that the state has set. There's flexible thresholds that cities around the state can decide.
So here's a quick question for you. So, does SEPA, so SEPA and NEPA, right, national versus state, does SEPA kind of override NEPA for us? No?
No, the opposite, however, SEPA is more stringent.
Okay, that's what I was figuring.
Most of the
Okay.
time what happens is if you have, most of the time you have to do both.
Okay.
Um,
And probably state can't directly go against national, it can only maybe tighten the reins a little bit?
Well, they can do whatever they want, but you gotta prove it.
Oh,
there's,
It depends on like where the money is coming from for the project to a degree. Like,
you'll find cities oftentimes will like segregate federal dollars into a certain portion of a project, so they only have to do the NEPA review on that portion of the project, and then they'll apply their state dollars to another piece, but you don't wanna
Okay,
co-mingle
interesting.
it, right? So if I only get like 50 grand from the feds, I don't wanna put that into a road construction job, because I'm gonna spend $50,000 just complying with NEPA on my road job, right?
But-
And so when this is probably a sensitive example, but like the flashing beacons, right, or the crosswalks.
Yeah, high-vis crossing.
There are things that it seems like a good idea to accept until you realize all the strings that are attached to it, and the federal, it's like, oh, well, now you need to use prevailing labor and wages because the state is taken. You have to use union labor for certain types of jobs and prevailing wages.
No prevailing wages.
Because that you're using federal dollars, and so you have to take all the boxes in the federal requirements. So cities get smart, as you would expect, and they start using money, they take federal money and they just throw all the other federal money and blend it all together, and okay, we're gonna do NEPA, that's fine, we understand that, but you try to keep it separate.
You're supposed to take into consideration also all of the reasonable like future actions that'll come about as a result of your one action. So you're not like saying like, well, we're gonna expand the road to 4 lanes, but we're not gonna talk about like what we actually wanna do is like put in some big box stores somewhere, but or, you're supposed to take all that into consideration.
So that you don't do one thing that then causes 3 more problems.
Yeah,
that
and
you-
not consider those
Right.
environmental effects
Okay.
for some reason, like.
Right, so what that's called is it's called piecemealing. And so we talked about a month ago, we talked about comprehensive, like some of the 3 Cs, coordinated, comprehensive, and consistent, and.
Cumulative
All
impacts.
those, yeah, so we'll talk about that here in a second, so so you can just jump in if you want on any of this stuff, because
I mean,
you're a practitioner and you've got, definitely.
You're doing it.
I think it's, people make it too hard. I mean, they're 2 different things, right? But they address the same subject, so you just overlay them, and where there's an exact match, you accept it, and when there's a difference, you go with the most stringent standard.
So the SEPA law is coming up on, what would it be, 40-year anniversary, 50-year anniversary here? Is that 50, right? 71, 21, right? Coming up on 50 years. Yeah, so it's not as good as it used to be, and this is kind of stealing thunder here, but it's not as good as it used to be because most management practices and rules that cities have adopted have already incorporated most of what SEPA would ask for. So we'll look at this, we'll look at the checklist, but it's not as, it was designed and implemented and rolled out in a time frame when people weren't thinking about the environment. But people do that now, and so it's not as helpful as it used to be, and so it can be more onerous than the value. So the principles, that paragraph on Land Use Regulatory Reform Act, I'm not gonna read that, but it basically says combine environmental analysis with land use decisions. Don't do them separately. Make sure you're taking in the environmental information when you're taking in the land use application and run them next to each other and combine them, because they're not separate issues, they're related. Principles of SEPA GMA integration, we talked a little bit about some of this stuff last month, but same processes and same documents that make land use decisions and environmental impacts. It says do not revise land use decisions made in the comp plan and development regulations at the project level. So what that means, number 3 there is, when we're talking about land use issues in this room, and we're talking about annexations, or we're talking about comp plan changes, or what are considered kind of legislative, no real wrong answer, right? That there are opinions or maybe ideas about things, but there's not. It's squishy enough that you can kind of opine on something, right? Don't blend in the project level pieces to that. So when you see a annexation request, we shouldn't be seeing a Walmart sketched out on that map at the same time. Because now you're gonna start making decisions on that annexation based on the Walmart, right? And you're gonna look and say, oh, that's a mobile home park. I'm not in favor of mobile home parks, so I'm not gonna approve this change. When it may otherwise check all the other boxes for the requirements for that type of change. So it's talking about keeping those things set, keep the project at the zoning code and permit counter level, and keep the comp plan and the environmental high level, environmental regulation. Make sense? Because that's just how we all work, because we want to see the details. So we'll get to that details, at the time of project.
So the environmental review is really only considering any use, not a particular use?
No, the SEPA checklist is looking at specific uses.
Specific.
But I'm talking about the, to keep those 2 separate, that don't,
Don't worry.
if you've got the SEPA checklist has a section called non-project review, which is complicated and frustrating, but it basically says, we're not really reviewing a project, I've got a document here. And we're gonna talk at a high level about the documents, were the document to be implemented, what the impacts of that document's implementation would be, But we're not talking about building a railroad at this spec, at this grade, at these crossings, right? Or we're not talking about specific, this developer's, duplex or 0 lot line developments. We're talking about, generally speaking, single family over there at this type of density, and you'll usually see ranges in the zoning code or in the comp plan especially, you'll see ranges.
So it's kind of like a 30,000 foot view, you're supposed to take care of that first, and then later on, you really go into detail.
When you have a site-specific application.
And it's appropriate. Okay.
Because then you're kind of weighing that against the vision document that you built in this comp plan.
Sure.
And the zoning code that is implementing that vision document has got some of those metrics that you would assess that project against. Right? So did it meet the setbacks? Is it meeting the height limitations? Is it got the right density in it? Those types of just factual findings. So, and that stuff is in the C checklist, but they've got two different ones. So, determine consistency between a proposed project and regulations. So you're looking again at whether the project in front of you with that specific, say, subdivision or building, large scale building permit matches up with what the state and the local environmental regulations require. One thing SEPA does is it assigns authority, so we'll talk a little bit about lead agency status, about who does what. And then number 6 is identify early in the review process the documents that are going to be needed to evaluate the impacts. So it's designed to say, SEPA checklist, which we'll look at again here in a second, is designed to say, wait a minute, I'm not quite satisfied as the reviewing agency with this, you need to go back and study this, give me some answers. So, that's a really brutal attempt to give a little bit of context. As they say in that middle paragraph, while detailing all SEPA rules is beyond the scope of this chapter, there's a lot of, you can read RCWs, WACs, SEPA, there's a whole thick handbook on SEPA that you can read if you're really going for motion. Or we can just do Q&A afterwards too if there's some questions. So this is a very, very basic environmental review process. Provide a pre-application conference for project proposals, which is optional but highly recommended. I
Those
don't.
work so well.
Yeah, I mean it's
They save the customer a lot of time.
and it's just good business. I mean it's just good customer service, and almost everybody
And
does
it
it.
helps them, really, it does.
And it ends up being, a lot of times those pre-apps or pre-subs end up being a little bit of a design meeting where you're coming to me, you're saying, we're gonna knock these walls out, we're gonna turn this into a B&B, we're gonna add tiny homes on the outside. What do you think about that? Or how does that, maybe more specifically, how does that match up with the zoning code? What does the zoning code say I should do about that? Or what type of traffic concerns should I be thinking about? So we can go through that stuff together, and I can save you money, so you don't pay an architect to do all these designs.
Sure.
And come through the door, and I'm saying I can't do anything.
Right.
So it makes sense. Some cities put a lot of people at that pre-sub. Like when you go to an Olympia pre-submittal meeting, there's probably 18 Olympia staff there, no joke. Couple planners, couple engineers, couple building inspectors, someone from the fire marshal's office, someone from, et cetera, et
Way to
cetera.
do business, yeah.
Well,
So what ends up happening though is you end up paying like $1,500 for a pre-sub.
Sure.
'Cause
But-
you're
But if you don't identify all those red flags, and
Yeah.
you get
How much
way
do you waste
further
on
into the
design?
Right, so
process.
you're hoping to expedite the process.
Yeah.
And if they do it right, they'll come prepared. So most jurisdictions have gotten savvy enough that they say, send in your pre-submittal materials based on this checklist that we've developed of what we want to see. Send it in, give us a few weeks to review it, and we'll sit down with you and we'll have this conversation. And then we'll provide you notes, written notes and comments from each of these departments. So that's where you're getting your value. Some places we do it for free here.
Well,
So-
within reason, things aren't getting real large.
Well,
like that,
and
yeah.
I mean, Olympia's got, they do all their DRCs on, I think, Tuesday afternoons, so they're going to all day Tuesday. So they're people who, that's their main job, pretty much all the time is to give design review or, development review feedback. Some where like here where you get maybe, 10 a year, there's no real reason to charge. It's better if we don't.
It's better customer relations.
So at that pre-sub, they walk in and they've got a series of plans, and they would potentially have a SEPA checklist done already based on the forms that we provided them. But if they haven't, then we can figure whether SEPA is required at that pre-sub. And so they say, I'm doing a 6-lot subdivision, yeah, we're gonna need SEPA, right? Or I'm doing a boundary line adjustment, I don't even know why we're having this middle line. So some of those things we can chat through and decide if it's, what the entire proposal is, because that comes back to, you know, what we were talking about, Will, that if you're doing 4 lots this year and 4 lots next year, that's not 2 short lots, that's subdivision, right? They're adjacent to each other.
Right.
So you can't game the system like that because, you know, you save yourself some money because you're not doing SEPA and a few other things, but we have to consider the totality of the project. So when you define the whole project and say, I got 5 acres and I'm gonna do 4 lots over here and then this other piece is gonna stay vacant for a while, well, I'm gonna have a conversation too about what you're doing with that other piece. It turns out you wanna, a lot of codes have language in there, if you come back within a certain period of time, you're gonna short plat that, we're gonna wrap the whole thing in and we charge you back fees and, you know,
If
so
you're gonna play that game, there's gotta be.
we define the entirety of the proposal, we identify any agency action, so like, say for example, it's not just SEPA, maybe it's an Army Corps permit, HPA or a JERPA or a shoreline substantial development permit, or maybe we need to do a Mazama pocket gopher survey, right? Some of these things, there's windows of opportunity that you have to do these in, and so we would say, oh, well, turns out, you know, you need to check for pocket gophers and it's November, and the only window for checking for gophers is May to October. Sorry, May to October.
At a source engine.
June to October. Not if you don't find them. So that's, that, you know, that's, you know, who else is at play here? It's maybe not just up to Tenino, maybe it's up to the Department of Ecology or Fish and Wildlife. And then, letter C there, determine lead agency. That's a good kind of, little planning nomenclature there, determine lead agency. Lead agency status is usually claimed by whoever's the biggest dog in the fight, would you agree?
Yeah.
Or whoever has the
Statutory.
main impact, you know, let's say your project straddles the county line, like there was a big, that Skookumchuck Wind Farm, EIS, which was up on, you know, there was straddled the Lewis and Thurston County line, but the developer said, we wanna do Lewis. They talked them into having Lewis County claim lead agency status instead of Thurston County. Most of the towers were in Lewis County. The ground-based, like, transmission stuff was in Thurston, or the shed, or the shack, or the power, whatever, you know, maintenance stuff, and the road access was in Thurston. But they talked Lewis into being lead agency status because they liked their process a lot better than Thurston's. So,
Some strategy.
yep, yeah, there's definitely some strategy. So, and then they could kind of work that out, so that's what the bottom of that paragraph says. The county or the city is not the lead agency when the local permit is not required. Another agency is the proponent, or another agency is designated as supervisor. So, you know, if DOD is coming in for a proposal over on the base, or, you know, in the training area for some type of activity, you know, Tenino's not gonna claim lead agent status for that. They're gonna be running under a federal lead agency.
Yeah, if there's a potential federal nexus, it always goes through the.
Yeah, good point. All right, so evaluate the proposal, we'll look at that in a minute, I'll just skip over that pretty much. Assess significance and issue a threshold determination. So, it's worth mentioning right here that the SEPA checklist is not an application. It's not a permit. You don't pay a fee and get it like you know, you're buying a license. Everybody has an application fee for SEPA because someone on our side has to spend the time or gets to spend the time to review. But it's a checklist that goes with something else. So it can go with the building permit, or it can go with the shoreline substantial development permit, or it goes with a comp plan amendment if it's a non-project. But it has to accompany something, it can't go by itself.
So it's like it's a supporting document.
Yeah, that's why they call it a checklist. It's kind of gotten its own weight and its own kind of inertia because of how much importance it carries and put on it, but it has to go with something. So what happens there is, once the planner reads through that checklist and figures out what the level of impact it is, the city's job, or the lead agency's job, is to give it a determination. And so the different determinations are, in the middle there of that letter E paragraph, determination of non-significance, which is a DNS, a determination of non-significance with mitigation, which is an MDNS, which they kind of omitted here, or a determination of significance, which I'll mention here in a minute, which leads to EIS. Okay, so those are the 5. So there's 5 levels. Exempt, you don't need to give me a secret checklist. DNS, whatever you said in here doesn't rise to the level of significance. We'll talk about what significance means in a moment. Mitigated determination of significance, which means there may be bad stuff in there, but I think if you follow these conditions, you're gonna be fine. Or there's a lot of bad stuff in there, I don't know if we can condition it enough, so we're gonna deem it significant, determine it significant, and we're gonna ask you to go through a scoping and EIS process.
What was the second to last one?
MDNS,
Exempt, DNS, MDNS.
EIS, or DS that leads to scoping, which leads to EIS, so determination of significance, DES.
And those are all SEPA terms, right, as opposed to NEPA, which
Yeah,
is
good
the
point.
finding of no significant impact, or FONSI. But it's basically the same thing.
So the NEPA does not have a SEPA checklist. NEPA does not have an environmental checklist. They have something called an environmental assessment. So it's a little different.
Yeah, but it's a bit of, it usually amounts to a bit of a checklist. I mean.
Yeah, well, it ends up being, but it's usually a bigger document, like an EA is an actual assessment
Like
outside of.
HUD has a checklist that just basically goes through all the executive orders
Yep.
that they have to be in compliance with,
Yep.
and all the federal environmental
Yep.
regulations and the, historical, there it is.
So if you, yeah, it's worth mentioning the word FONSI, FONSI, which is an acronym for finding out no significant impact, FONSI. And that is a outcome of an environmental process using NEPA.
You can also have a mitigated FONSI as well. So like if you were like out on the coast, or I guess you don't have to be on the coast, but if you were gonna cut down some trees as part of a project that sort of met marble murrelet habitat, but no marble murrelets are in the area, so you're not likely to adversely impact the murrelet, then you might have to do something, some kind of mitigation.
Yeah, and I think you use the term in there that's, I don't think they use FONSI in there, they would just say not likely to adversely impact, is not the phrase. But again, every agency, like EPA's got a different checklist than HUD has, who has a different one from DOD, who has a different one from Federal Highways, USDOT, and they all have kind of different approaches to it. And they do cite the reason that they're asking you that, and it's oftentimes in an executive order, that is subsequent to that NEPA Policy Act, National Environmental Policy Act.
So there's a central core, but it just starts getting offshoots.
Well, I think what happened is the Congress gave the policy document and said each agency gets to implement and do your rulemaking. And so then they did, and they.
So they'll have like a guidance document.
Yeah, they built it based on what they do all the time, so BLM's is gonna be different than NOAA's.
Because they're building it based on their specific
Right.
needs.
Right, right. But there's again, the frustrating thing, if you're building a road, it's gonna be different if it's on BLM land or national park land or Forest Service land.
Sure.
They've all got different standards, and so for someone who's trying to do it in that realm, it's frustrating. But especially because it's the same planet, it's the same dirt, it's not really gonna have a different impact, it's just your rules say we have to do these things, and that's again back to the values, you know, that at some point along the line, I think this stuff's important, stuff's not. Alright, so DNS, MDNS and DS, I would, if I, this is a guess, I would say in 21st century Washington, I'm gonna stick DNSs at like 75% of all checklists. I'd say there's 15% MDNSs, and maybe out of that 15%, probably half of them could be DNSs if the agency wanted them to, you know, based on how they write them. And again, that's back to my comment on kind of best management practices. So you're writing that down, you're not supposed to quote me on that, so those percentages, but, and then the last 10% would be DSs. Did I get the math right there?
I wrote educated guess, by the
Yeah.
way.
75, 15, 10. I think the last 10% would be, it's pretty rare. You know, you have a few per year, so maybe that number, maybe it should be a single digit, you know, 5% or something, but
Yeah, not
and
very many
most of the
projects,
time,
you know.
they know what projects are gonna go DS, EIS, and because the agency will tell you ahead of time. So, what's some high profile EISs that we've seen lately? Somebody give me an example.
We mentioned the wind farm, right?
Yep.
Skip wind farm.
What else?
What is that, what is that refinery or whatever on the Columbia that they're
Yep.
working on?
So,
So like the pipeline that had all the trouble that they were trying to run from Canada down to the
Keystone?
Gulf, that would be kind of mixed up in this, right?
Yeah, they had to do an EIS. and
Keystone
then
would be like federal though, not CPC.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similar with the concept, I mean, so an environmental assessment would be the lighter side of an environmental impact statement. They don't have to collect as much, you're more collecting data, not generating new information and studies.
So the Port of Tacoma that's trying to expand right out here,
They would probably have to
They're-
do maybe an EIS if they wanted to build that logistics center on that property, maybe. Kind of
Or the
depends.
coal terminal.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
so
the
the good example is the Millennium Bulk Terminal down in Longview, which they were going to build a coal plant down there that was, I mean, someone understands it better than I would, but they're basically bringing coal in from a lot of other places, sorting it in a way that it met
Grading it.
the grading standards that their clients wanted, and then they were loading it on ships and shipping it other places.
So
right?
processing center.
Right,
The
so
coal
they weren't
processing.
actually like mining anything on that site, right? It was all bringing it in, so it had a bunch of trains and then a bunch of, you know, coal sorting activities. And then it had it had a dredging requirement of the Columbia River. And so, you know, anytime you start messing with the bottom of the river or a lake or something, you're asking for like a pretty heavy duty, you know, environmental review. So I was just looking at that stuff earlier this week. I think that was like a 4-year process.
just to go through.
And then they ended up, you know, basically Ecology and Cowlitz County denied certain permits that Millennium Bulk was asking for, and Millennium Bulk sued them. So it's gonna go through a court system. And they sued them based on, you know, disagreements on the application of the rules.
Sure.
But most things, I mean, that's a big deal. I don't know how many trains it was, but it was like a lot of trains, right? And it was constant, and so they were talking about, you know, crossings all the way up and down the west coast, and coal dust going into the air because these things aren't covered, and then when you dump them over, the coal goes everywhere, and I don't know, whatever else. The dredging, tribal issues, socioeconomic. NEPA and SEPA have different kind of discipline reports required, kind of different standards, but they're very similar, but they're not identical. They kind of talk about them differently. One says environmental justice, and one says socioeconomic impacts. They basically mean similar things, but one's got like presidential orders behind them, and the other's got, you know, legislative intent. So they're a little bit different. But when you doing a DS and going into an EIS, that means that it's a big thing, and the agency that you're working with says like, I don't know how you're gonna avoid dredging the you know, the Columbia River to get your deep ships in. That's gonna be an impact. You can't do anything about it. You're gonna put in, 600-foot or cranes or, wind turbines, how are you gonna avoid the visual impact on that? You're not gonna be able to. You can maybe mitigate them a little bit and or point them in a certain direction or not shine lights on them, but there's gonna be a bird striking path. There's just,
Yeah, unavoidable.
right, there's some unavoidable, what is called, significant adverse impacts, which I think we'll get at here on the next page. Do you have a question? Questions on that? So, the next series of pages talks about EISs. I don't actually want to spend a ton. The next whole page talks about EIS. Most of the time, when places get into EIS, they hire help. So, private development hires help because there's going to be a lot of, like we were saying, a lot of studies that are going to have to be done, not just what's out there, but science about things, about what's going to happen when whatever was out there before is not out there now because I'm building something. How's that going to affect humanity or whatever? So those have to get studied and they end up being expensive. Most EISs can't do one for less than 300, and they're easy 2 million I bet the one at Millennium Bowl was deep seven figures, solid 7 figures, just because it's 4 years worth of work and you got all these specialists and you got.
Got to pay him.
Yeah. So, surprised they don't spend any time here on significant adverse impact.
I mean, that would just kick it into the EIS.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to.
But that's the standard at which you're trying to evaluate our checklist that we look at here is what significant adverse impact is. It's funny they spend like a whole paragraph talking about there's a certiorari and a bunch of Supreme Court stuff and interlocutory review, fine. Anyway, so when you look at the checklist, and you look at the development, and you're like, I don't think we can figure this out on our own. We're gonna need some help. Again, we're gonna dredge, or we're gonna pull out half of the hill because that's where we want to put our development. That's can't do the development without pulling out the hill. No matter what best management practices you do, the hill's still coming out, right? Those would be kind of the things that you do an EIS on. So you got 2 phases. First phase there in the that first paragraph is you have to describe the entirety of the project and you have to start trying to figure out what alternatives you have. So EISs are based on alternatives. So you say we've got this development, we want to build 200 houses. To build 200 houses, we need to pull half of this hill. We need to cut it away and ship it somewhere else and build our houses on top of that land. So that's our full build. So that's an alternative, right? The other alternative is don't do it, no action alternative.
Building it somewhere else.
What happens if we do nothing? Then another one would be maybe building it somewhere else and not impacting this side at all. Maybe there's a better site on the other side of the hill where you don't have to do that. Or maybe you, instead of building 200 homes, maybe you build 45, and now you don't have to pay for that. So there's a series of alternatives. Most of the time, just like life, breaks into 3 choices, right? And it's don't do anything, do the crazy big thing, or pick something fun in the middle, right? And so usually a preferred alternative will emerge as somewhere in the middle. And those times when it doesn't is when people end up in court, like in the Millennium Bowl case. So like, your EIS says all this stuff's gonna happen, we don't think you can meet the standards that we've set, so you don't get to do any of it, no matter what, so you have to do the no option alternative. So that's tough. So, you can see here that there's, so that's the first phase, is where you basically say, here's what the project is defined, here's what we think some of the here's the project defined, and then you do go through a scoping process, which says to everybody, here's our project, tell us what we should be thinking about. So Will says, hey, remember the wetlands, you know, Aaron says, how about how our school's gonna be impacted? Corey says, I'm concerned about traffic, so all that stuff comes in, and the agency organizes it and says, we need to look at traffic. Sounds like there's some concerns about wetlands we didn't know about, and there's overcrowding in the schools, and we're gonna have to study that too. So that scoping process helps informs what the documents are gonna look like, and what studies are gonna be done. And so then the studies are done, the draft is put together, each of those, say, disciplines, assess how they would be handled in those alternatives. So in the no-build alternative, traffic's fine, wetlands fine, school's fine. Maybe the wetlands degraded and the wetland wouldn't get upgraded in the no-action alternative, right? So we would just say that, we would say, hey, there's this degraded wetland that, you know, it's gonna remain degraded because no one's gonna come and voluntarily spend their own hard-earned money to fix it. But this project would, so, you know, that's an impact, right? And so then you lay out the disciplines in those other alternatives, and then you put that together in a draft EIS. So that's a DEIS, draft EIS, and then you circulate that for comment. So I send it back to everybody who who submitted comments, as well as post it in certain places, and everyone has an opportunity to review it again. So tribes, other agencies, other state agencies, everyone has a chance for a whack at it. And then we take those comments back in and we respond to them, and sometimes the response is, thank you for your comment. And sometimes the response is, you're right, that was an omission, we'll fix it, or we didn't know that was there, we'll go back and do more studies, right? There are a variety of responses. And then based on that feedback, we revise the draft EIS and then publish it as a final EIS. And that final EIS goes back out, and it's got a 7-day. Most of the time, by the time you get to final, you kind of know how it's going to end up. And that's the opportunity for people to say, you blew off my comment about the wetlands, or you didn't address to my liking the comment on the school capacity. And so then I'm going to challenge the adequacy of your EIS. That's what it's going to help you adequately did your job on the EIS. So that's kind of the process. And if there's no appeal, then it goes into action, and then that thing was with, like a building permit or the subdivision or the shoreline or the dredging or whatever, the HPA, the jerk or whatever, all those things, then you can start doing your action. So I don't even spend much time on that, but I did. It's important to know. I mean, it's kind of the framework of environmental, it's like the big monster in the room for Washington plan, for development.
Unless everybody embraces it.
Yeah, so that's right, you can sometimes see, and that's what that paragraph is there, where it says final EIS may recommend the conditions based on SEPA policies which can be used to mitigate environmental impacts. And so sometimes you can even, through the process, get it back down to the MGS level. So something that is, I don't know, I was thinking like maybe the new hockey stadium or a new, something like that, which would ordinarily be an EIS, maybe there's enough support for it that people would say, we think that, again, applying the rules that the city of Seattle has and the city county has and the air quality people have and ecology has and all these other agencies, once we apply their rules, we're not gonna learn anything new by going through 3 years worth of environmental studies. It's gonna basically say, follow best management practices, apply for the permits and make sure you match up with what we've already told you to do. So it's those times when maybe people don't have answers to questions, that's when the EIS is pretty valuable. Like maybe nobody knows how to dredge the Columbia River to a depth that allows for big cargo ships without impacting the salmon. And so they want a salmon biologist to go study that for a while.
Sounds reasonable.
Also illustrates why the process is as costly as it is. But I mean, that's the trade-off.
So
Go ahead.
the lead agency is gonna be the one that makes the finding,
Yep,
but all the other agencies will have
yep.
doing that.
Yeah, and the lead agency would write it, or they'd hire people to help them write it, right?
Or you could, I mean, you write it as them and they just
Yeah.
kind of agree to what you've written.
Yeah. And that's what's happening with like HP and stuff like that, that's what's happening.
So I guess I was kinda going into this thinking like citizens being on one side and then but you could also have jurisdictions.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, so, you know, the the lead agency says, you know, we've dotted all our Ts and crossed our Is, and then another one says, well, no, we disagree with part of that.
Yeah, so you get, the Hatfields and McCoys going at it.
Great.
Well, but that was your point with, being able to justify your decision adequacy.
Yep.
Every time you make a determination, you gotta walk your readers through how you arrived at it,
Sure.
And as long as you do that consistently, and the courts will tell you it's a rational basis, right? If you have some rational basis that you can articulate, that some reasonable person would go, well, it makes sense, that that's the standard.
We also, if we're looking at any of this stuff, it's also in front of, there's like a public hearing moment as well where people can offer their input or challenges to the findings of the SEPA checklist that project applicant can submit, right?
Yep.
It's all gonna be published.
Yeah, because that's part of that public hearing process, and so then, the planning commission says, yeah, we're not comfortable making this determination until staff addresses this issue, and then staff's gonna say, applicant, you gotta go back and do a study on this, groundwater issue that the public is saying is a thing.
Which is, the intent of the pre-application process, right? Try to
But
identify
sometimes
as much
people
as-
don't know, right, and sometimes,
I know.
I bought this, I live in New Jersey, I thought this was a cool thing, and
Then
now
you
you're all
already do.
telling me it's gotta go for permit, So, second paragraph there on the page 148 under G, if a project is to be denied on environmental grounds, grounds must be identified and conditions identified in secret policies. A project may be denied if reasonable alternatives do not exist to mitigate a substantial impact. So, purely identifying that there's going to be the slaughter of a bunch of albino salmon doesn't mean that that's okay, right? If you can't mitigate it, then there's a grounds for denial. Two things I want to touch out on letter H, appeals under SEPA. Appeals under SEPA may be procedural or substantive. Any guess on what the difference between those two are?
So I would guess that procedural would be the way in which it was put together and done, and substantive would be the actual, like something physical or tangible.
Yeah, one's the process based. I missed a deadline, I didn't route it to the right people, we didn't notice it in the newspaper, I didn't have a public hearing. Those are all procedural errors, right? I messed up the process. Substantive means you said 4 and it turned out to be 8.
Yeah.
Right? Or you said there wasn't and there turned out there was. Those are substantive issues. Most appeals happen on procedural issues. Because we give it's a checklist, we give the applicant, it's kind of like the honor system, right? We give the applicant the opportunity to tell us what's going on in the property, and,
Okay.
it's a procedural issue.
Right, so they on the checklist, they fudge something or don't quite account for something, and later on you find out it does. Well, that's when you can go back and say,
Yeah.
hey, we have some problems here.
Yeah, mostly what happens then is you stop the clock and you say, all right, we're not gonna advance this thing until you go answer these questions. Sometimes the projects completely go away then, sometimes they come back and they provide the documentation. It's worth saying that, the city or county may not choose to provide administrative appeals under SEPA. If appeals of project decisions under SEPA are provided, they must be combined with the permit decision appeal and not more than one hearing. So you can remember the SEPA checklist and the adequacy of the documents that are referenced in the checklist is a little different than the subdivision that you're reviewing or the Walmart building permit that you're reviewing, right? One's environmental based, one's kind of building code based, and they're not always. You could say that I am challenging the height calculation on this building. That doesn't have anything to do with SEPA, right? SEPA doesn't talk about heights in that way. It might talk about view obstruction or something, but it's not talking about you built a house on a slope and you're supposed to, average the height of the points of the roof, and I think staff did it wrong, and I think it's too tall. I'm gonna challenge that, right? That's not SEPA. SEPA would probably, so that's different.
Well, I think that too, that means it's our municipal code and it's our process, and if we don't provide an administrative appeal in our process, then the appellant, would-be appellant has direct recourse to county court.
Superior Court,
Yeah. So what we basically do is, we can have our standards, and if our standards aren't met and we deny something, we foist the cost of the appeal off onto the county, but we have to accept the county's decision.
Which means it's no longer
Our
us,
choice, right.
we are handing it off.
So
and-
it behooves us to have an administrative appeal process. And I think right now, there's a big fly in that ointment because we talk about a hearing examiner and we don't got one.
Yeah. We talked about that land use appeal process. I don't think we did in GMA at all. I don't think we did. Most of the time, it's a bad idea to have you or the council be the appellate body,
Right.
because it's conflict of interest, you're not professionals, it's not fair, they're your neighbors in some cases, and so we try to have those types of hairy land use challenges go to a land use professional. It could be a judge, it could be like a retired judge, but it's not a judge judging the same with a judicial hearing with, judicial rules, it's got administrative court rules. So it's the administrator, the legal administrator of the zoning for the land use code. Different.
So it could be like a lawyer.
Yeah, there's planners, there's
I
people.
think we
who
did
just-
talk about that.
Yeah, they don't even have to be lawyers, they have to have an absolute, grasp of land use.
Otherwise, if that doesn't go well, then I appeal the hearings examiner's decision to Superior Court.
Right.
And then we're not even dealing with someone in Thurston County telling us what we've gotta do, right? Now
Oh,
we're going to
no,
this,
yeah, Thurston
oh,
County
that's
Superior
still,
Court, yeah.
okay, that's still Thurston.
But Superior, we go to,
Although you could, once you enter the legal arena, if you know that the court is unfriendly to you, but the guys in the next county over, you can ask a change of venue and
and there's,
that's all legal maneuver.
there's growth management hearings board, I think we talked about that last month, about, bodies that have been appointed to deal with high-level land use issues. But a project, depending on the claim, let's say, for example, that you were appealing the height calculation that I made on a home, on a slope, and the hearings examiner agreed with me, and you wanted to appeal his or her decision, that's going to Superior Court. And then the judge then is gonna look at, the code, and then look at the plan and calculate it, and whatever you do, it's not gonna go to land use. It's not gonna go to hearing board. So let's look at the SEPA guidelines there. SEPA need not be intimidating if the following guidelines are kept in mind. All right. Land use decisions by the community should be accompanied by a SEPA document, BMS, DS, or EIS, unless a specific exemption is spelled out in writing. SEPA-based mitigation must be based on written adopted policies with written findings. And then finally, policies should be specific and consistent with comp plan policies. So we'll provide a fun example there. Since one effect of a desired increase in density is increased congestion, there should not be a SEPA policy requiring mitigation or denial of a project that creates congestion. So can't just say that's gonna bring more traffic, that's unacceptable. Well, every project's gonna bring more traffic. So you have to get the standards, and you just say that's where the mitigation comes in. If you hit a certain threshold, now you need to pay a fee in lieu of, or impact fees, or fix a signal, or build a new road, or whatever. There's always things that you can do to kind of tamp that thing down, but you can't just say, building more houses is gonna make us more population. Obviously. All right, these sound good? Let's look at some details. All right, so City of Tumwater, this is public record, so even though I printed it from SCJ computers, it's all gone through public record. This is pretty recent. So maybe spend about 15 more minutes on this. We'll take questions or whatever.
You know what lots are gonna be most expensive?
Yep.
Probably lot 13. I think lots 7 is on a tree track. Somebody
Yeah.
end up mowing their backyard. Okay, so you're doing what everybody does, which they look at the map first and, figure out the project.
All right, which we're not supposed to do, right?
You can do that in here, because we're gonna, what would typically come in, and this came in for a pre-sub, right? The city of Tumwater requires pre-submittal, $880 fee that goes with this environmental checklist. And so they brought this in and they said, hey, city, would you help us apply for what we need to apply for? So this is the pre-submittal version of the site plan. The full site plan has got, 15 other sheets that talk about how utilities are gonna get there, what the rest of the road looks like, curb cuts, all that jazz. So you can see this is like a planner drawing, which is why I can understand it. Right? December 4th, 2018, that's the pre-sub. So we're about a year out, and I think I saw the rest of the plans in that folder, so they're kind of going through the rest of the entitlement process right now. Okay, so what are we looking at here on this site plan? We've got 6 acres of total site area. We've got 1.15 acres of right-of-way. We've got about 8/10 of an acre in open space. We've got a total of 28 lots. So the density, which is lots divided by the total minus right-of-way minus open space and trees, gives us 6.8 units per acre. So those are pretty basic planning level numbers, right? So we'd be looking at things, and you look at those lots and they've all got square footage amounts on them, right? They're right around 5,000 square feet. So the first thing I do when people call in and they talk about development activities, we start talking about, densities of lot sizes. As you notice, there's no houses on here, right? So they're not telling me how big the houses are gonna be, they're not telling me how they're gonna be aligned or where they're gonna be aligned, right? Or, whether they're driveways or whatever. They're just cutting up the land and getting it ready. So that's what we have. So then the SEPA checklist comes in, and you'll notice on the SEPA checklist, it's got a big, most of the pages have got a big column for agency use. This is a digital copy of a PDF of the environmental checklist, which we really like. It makes it faster to fill out, especially repetitively. And the agencies can also comment, but there's a lot of them that are still paper copies. So let's look at the SEPA checklist here real quick. So what comes through the door is this completed environmental checklist, fee of $880, and then City of Tumwater requires name and address list of property owners within 300 feet of the subject property. So that all comes as part of the SEPA checklist. This front-end language, the purpose of the checklist, the instruction for applicants, the instruction for lead agencies, and the checklist for non-project, that's all standard. Cities don't change the SEPA checklist. This is a WAC 197, 11, 960, kind of straight up. So everyone's running off the same SEPA checklist. So next page, inside of page 2, background, Kimmy Street plat, Tenino Land Company, address, date of the checklist, city of Tumwater, kind of what they have. So this is kind of how it works. It's broken into sections, and then they just start asking questions, and you're supposed to respond. It's supposed to be layperson responses. I mean, the checklist is supposed to be able to be filled out by a layperson, the layperson, non-planning professional or design professional. Depending on what jurisdiction you're in, that's probably not going to work. If you try walking into City of Olympia with a 5-lot subdivision and you personally filled out, you're gonna have a hard time, because they're looking for very specific answers. I almost brought one of theirs, but we'd be recorded, so I don't wanna besmirch the good work of the City of Tumwater's staff, because it's complicated, and they've got a lot of standards, and they've got thick manuals, and so there's a lot of things they're asking for, and they've learned those over time, right? They've had tens of thousands of development proposals come through, so they know what they need to do in order to review it, and kind of what the expectation at their level is. You'll see in number 7 there, there are no known future plans. That type of comment is pretty common. There's a lot of questions in here where we're just not sure yet, right? And it's okay to answer that way. What you don't want to say is you wouldn't want to see as a reviewer NA in there. Don't tell me it's not applicable. There's got to be something in there, right? So this is that section where that 5-lot subdivision has the opportunity to say, I've got 2 other parcels next to us, and I think we're going to come in for those in phase 2. Or this, you could also say, hey, this is phase 1 of a 4-phase project over the next 20 years. I'm not going to ask them to do 20 years worth of SEPA samples, right? So I get it. We'll do this big one first, but now I know to be on the lookout. And maybe as I review it, I would say, have you thought about connectivity to that other tract? Or, what does that do to groundwater? Or how's the sewer system? And all those design questions, which most developers have already thought about that. Number 8, this is kind of the hint for the planner to know what else to look for, and many of these things are attached to the back of this exact SEPA checklist. So there's a forester report in here, groundwater mounting analysis, and a soils report that would be attached to the back of this. And this is always fun, number 10. List any government approvals or permits that will be needed for your proposal if known. Some jackwagon decided that a SEPA determination was a good thing to put on here since this is a SEPA checklist. Come on.
Well, you didn't want to put NA, right?
Yeah, right.
Well,
What's out there?
it says preliminary
What's
plat
full?
approval,
Filled out
engineering
all the
permits, and
right
building
stuff.
permits. You could have left it at that. I mean, we know we're doing SEPA here, folks.
Being thorough.
People get impulsed to, cram as much information relevant or not sometimes.
Yeah, so there's definitely two multiple schools of thought, but definitely a variety of how these come through. Some are like complete bare bones, thinking that if they don't tell you, it's better, and then you have to ask. And there's other ones who really get to sink at it, thinking, oh, it's so much. they're not gonna pay
Overwhelm
attention.
them.
Yeah. But you actually want to be in the middle. You just want to give like concise, clear. I mean, it tells you in the instructions, give us good answers to these things. It even says, do not use not applicable or does not apply.
Couldn't ask the question otherwise, right?
So, background is that's first couple pages, then it moves into environmental elements. These are just checks, that's kind of fun. Again, they're kind of looking for triggers in here of ways, things we should be aware of. So this is asking questions about soil, letter E on page 4. Looking at like 5,000 cubic yards of excavation, 5,000 cubic yards of fill. Fill material will be sourced from washed out approved borrow pits. What that tells me as a planner is they're not gonna balance it on the site, they're gonna pull stuff out. Because I bet this 85% kg is not good for building on. So they gotta basically pull the bad stuff out and then make good stuff. Anyway, 45% impervious surface, that would be kind of an area I'd look at in the Tumwater code to see what the limitation was on the property. construction emissions, that's really common, you'll see a lot of times in SEPA checklist, people commenting on the construction impacts. A lot of time, that's the only time that there's gonna be emissions from those types of vehicles. Surface water, opportunity to talk about wetlands and streams. So here's a good thing that we try to do on all of ours. On page 5, number 3, water. Question is there any surface water body on or in the immediate vicinity of the site? And so what they do here is, instead of just saying no, what they do here is they say, according to the Washington DNR GIS database and the National Wetlands Inventory, there are no streams or wetlands within the area. So they sourced it for me, right? So instead of, because I'm gonna have to go on there and look anyway, right? Just because someone says there's not, I'm gonna go and look anyway and pull that stuff. That's why this costs $880 at the review another way. So that's some like 10 hours of somebody's time or something like that. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna pull the National Wetland Inventory, which we know is not very great. It's based on old LiDAR layers and a bunch of other stuff, but I'll pull it up and I'll look and see if what they're telling me is true. And then I'll actually go and look for other sources that we know, like the county has wetlands layers. If someone's delineated that site in the past, that's gonna be on there.
They have wetland review areas too, where if you're in close enough proximity to known wetlands, then you have to do a delineation or something.
So let's say in this plat map here, there's a wetland up in this upper left-hand corner. I mean, that's a decent possibility with how green that stuff is. And there's even, if you look to the left of lot 14, there's an area that's vegetated without trees. You kind of see. I guess that's this. Well, there could be an area over there that's vegetated without trees. Those are usually things we look at on the aerials. It's like, it looks like there's something over here. So just because it's not on the subject parcel doesn't mean the buffer doesn't extend into the site. And so then we have to figure out what the classification, the designation of that wetland would be, and whether that would potentially impact lot 14 and 13. Anyway, you can see it's pretty straightforward. It goes through kind of so we hit earth, we hit air, we hit water. No fire, John. Groundwater. Same thing, remember on the top here, 100-year floodplain, if so note the location on the site plan according to FEMA flood map center, the site is not within 100-year floodplain. Those are good responses, that's what the plan is. Source it, don't just say there's not.
Actually, the check.
I'm gonna check.
So, I don't do a lot of SEPA stuff, but, so it's not common to just include that map?
It could be, and that's, we do that, because we print them out anyway, because we know most of the jurisdictions we work in are gonna ask for them. So we print them out. And the FEMA firm map center is great, it's fast. You know, you Google FEMA firm, you go on there and you type in your address, it goes to the site, and you basically say export this view as a PDF or JPEG or a TIFF, and you print it out.
Nice.
And it scales it and gives you the whole little thing, it's super groovy. Back in when I first started planning, we just had paper maps, and we'd have to like throw them up on top of the copier, fold it and create it, and so it's all digitized now.
That's awesome.
Question 2, on page 6, under B, describe waste materials that would be discharged. The project will be connected to city sewer, therefore no septic systems are proposed. Again, this is this SEPA checklist that's used all across the state, so it's gotta cover all these different circumstances. So that, it's legitimate. The frustrating thing, and I guess I'll diverge from something here real quick, just so you know, non-projects, so like a comp plan amendment or a zoning code change, they're not really a project, right? It's a policy change at your level. You still have to fill out the same changes. All this is still has to be filled out. And then you have a supplemental we'll talk about that you can get off the back. So in that case, it's something like, I usually say something like, no groundwater withdrawals will occur as this is a non-project, policy change to the comp plan, or this is a rezone request, or this is an annexation, or, so you kind of kick it back at them.
You think they'd have the exemption provision for certain things like that? That makes sense.
So the non-project sheet was a late addition, a later addition, and I thought initially when it came in, that it was just that part that you had to fill it out. But it ended up that was a supplement, so it actually makes non-projects like more onerous, it's just got a little more paperwork.
And it
Anyway,
has to be.
groundwater, water runoff, stormwater plants, animals. Songbirds always get their fair share, calling out. Most western Washington sites have a wide variety of those.
There's a lot of different songbirds.
Yeah, some people, like the city of Olympia, if you ask the question about is the site a part of a migration route, and if so, explain. You wouldn't be able to get away with the site is located within the Pacific Flyway. They're gonna want other details. What birds are we talking about? What season are we talking about? Is your site, have any tree, whatever? Does it have a pond in the back of the migratory bird clusters, those types of things? So there's different jurisdictions accept different levels of details. And remember, what the intent of this is to determine if there's a significant adverse impact. That's what we're trying to find out. Okay, so, anything else on these next pages 8 and 9? So
There
this is,
regularly used references for some of the bird and animals
yeah,
type stuff that we
Yeah.
use.
I don't have it handy, but we have a Olympia version of the checklist that has all that stuff on there. Because most of the time it's the same, a lot of those impacts are the same. It's kind of fun on page 9 in the middle there, super tiny print. It's asking about hazardous chemical conditions, and apparently the Northwest Pipeline is within a mile of the project. Which that project has had issues, maybe not that one, but pipelines have pushed in the past. So. And sometimes subdivisions will have an easement run right through the middle of them. So that's why that question is on there.
And what your level of tolerance to risk is.
Land and shoreline. I guess I sort of skipped over one of these. You'll see at the top of page 10, at number 3, it says proposed measures to reduce or control noise impacts. So that's again trying to give the agency the ability to say, when you follow normal, best available science or best management practice or city code, you're gonna be able to mitigate these noise impacts. So, like a lot of times in this one, we would say, comply with city of Tomorrow construction hours, which is probably like 10 o'clock at night, and then, muffling the exhaust systems or spraying down the dust, on a dirt road, all these types of construction techniques that they use. Versus in the old day, if you don't have that on the books, then they're gonna do a mitigated determination of significance, and say, you gotta spray it down, you gotta, you can't do it after 10 o'clock. So a lot of stuff is caught up and then codified to the point that there's not a lot of interest in these things, or less than that, so.
Again, the more you embrace the philosophy, the less issues you have.
And there's also, it's on page 12, when they start talking about housing, you can see that there's a question B, 9B, it says how many units, if any, would be eliminated, and what indicate whether high, middle, or low income. And then the next one's proposed measures to reduce or control housing impact. So you can kind of see there's maybe some values in here by the types of questions you're asking, but there's also not a lot that may need to be done on the applicant's part to answer that if there's not a requirement. Most cities don't have I don't know of any city that has a requirement for mandatory low-income housing component for every development, so. Anything else on this?
So SEPA's only concerned with noise generated by the development, not the noise already associated with the site and building houses next to like I-5.
Yeah, cause it's, the nexus is on getting that applicant to mitigate their impact, right? And so.
But if this was like a NEPA environmental assessment, I did one for the low income housing initiative on Martin Way. And so, but that was HUD, and they have a calculation that takes into account like they do like a traffic survey, using existing traffic survey data, you calculate like what the noise level is likely to be, and it actually determines where the building can go on the site in some cases, because they wanted to build like low-income housing in a shelter in that spot, but they would have to move, they wanted to build 2 buildings, and they had to move one of the buildings back on the site, because it's like proximity to the road, and
Right.
it takes into account nearby stop signs and typical traffic.
But that's
day
trying
and
to
night.
reduce the impact it's trying to provide a better living situation for the people
Right.
in those units versus, impact of the development on the traffic.
I'm just commenting that that's their focus is on protecting, sensitive noise receptors, residential, I guess.
Alright, so I'm on page 14 by this point. I'm looking at traffic, transportation. This is a pretty typical piece. Letter F at the bottom. So the font's in the same text, so our response starts at the completed project is forecast to generate. So the first part of letter F is the question about how many vehicle trips per day. Our response starts at the completed project is forecast to generate 264 vehicle trips, trip ends per weekday, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the next page is the source of that ITE, the Green Book trip gen manual. And in this case, that's where the planner says, hey, that exceeds our threshold for just taking your word for it. You need to do a traffic generation memo or a traffic impact analysis, which is like a 30-page thing, which takes the types of trips and generates a number and then assigns them to the road network. It says, okay, 4 trips are coming in this way, 8 trips are coming in this way, et cetera, et cetera. And then the city can say, well, this is a county road, or used to be a county road, or whatever, and so that's when they start tackling for nexus related impacts, so impacts that are resulting from the development. So if you drive up to Highway 99, when you first get into Tumwater on the left-hand side, is that big new development, and now all of a sudden you got brand new pavement out there, right? And you got a new signal out there at there's a new signal at the pawn, what used to be the RV pawn shop by the.
Oh, okay, yep. On the
That's
south side.
what is that? It's just past 93rd, it's like it's like maybe 81st or something
Really,
like
it's
that.
actually been the last couple of weeks, a new stoplight?
They replaced the stoplight.
Oh, they replaced it,
They
oh.
upgraded the stoplight and
Oh, now
they did
I'm
new pavement and there's new, all those, so that's the city
So,
saying, your 200-unit development is gonna cause impact on our road, so you gotta go fix it, right?
But-
Or you gotta do.
Well, they're paying for that Tumwater Boulevard.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask, but further north, where they extended the lane, I mean, they've done tons of work, could they be part of that as well? Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so there's both off-site and on-site improvements, and so,
So on-site would be either on the property or just a perimeter,
yeah.
but then an off-site might be 2 blocks down where you realize there's gonna be bottleneck. Okay.
Or they have networks that they figure this stuff out on, and so, in fact, if you looked at on this little inset map, on the project site, you've got Kimmy Street, you see that, and you got 88, I bet, in fact, if I went back and looked at this IT manual on how these 264 trips were assigned, that intersection of 93rd and Kimmy, that's gonna have to get improved. Or they'll have to contribute cash towards a future improvement. So this checklist, this checklist doesn't do that, right? All it does is initially identifies that we're saying 264, and then the planner on the other side says, well, our threshold's 50.
Okay.
Once you exceed 50, you do a TIA, and then we'll look at that, how that TIA assigns the trips, and we'll have a discussion with you about, how to do the improvements.
And so if there was more development that was known in a different location up there, they would probably just be asked to contribute money to
Perhaps,
some greater.
yeah, so like fee in lieu of instead of, but what the idea here is that they're looking at this development, and they know this other development's coming in, or this other one just came in, and so they're adding all those volumes to the model. And then, in that way, they don't, put in a roundabout, and then 6 weeks later, rip it out and put a signal.
Right.
Has that ever happened?
I don't know, I think, I've been involved on projects where, by the time it got all the way through the contracting and construction process, it was only built for 3 years before they ripped down the overpass. So, it's just sometimes how it happens. So, that's kind of the fast and loose version of this. Just gonna look back and see at the trees. Sometimes, I don't know how they answer this one. They said they had a forester's report, and, on that, on page 8, page 2, letter 8, number 8. So I would look at that forester's report, because I'm gonna wanna see what kind of trees these are. Because City of Tumwater has an urban forestry plan, it's got a tree retention plan, and so we know that, and that's why, maybe there's a few oaks back here that would hit the priority habitat species, or, special requirements for seeing them. So today we looked at background of SEPA, quite a bit on NEPA and EISs, and then we looked at a plat map with, a SEPA checklist that went with it, so. What questions do you have?
Plat map and a preliminary plat and a short.
Short plat is 4 or less usually, and it's exempt from SEPA, and it's intended to be kind of like a mom and pop operation. Like most people who are doing short plats aren't making no money, right? It's just, I got extra land, I cut it up, sell it off, whatever, it's a one-time deal. Most developers aren't going around looking for small lots to cut into 3 or 4. They're just not gonna, it's a lot of effort, not a lot of money. So this, 23, this is called a preliminary plat, or this is getting close to what it would be called for preliminary plat. And then the final plat is when
All the details.
all the details are in, and it's on a Mylar, and it's signed, and that's what everybody agrees to. But they both have the same SEPA checklist.
Oh, yeah, no. Again, familiar term to some, embrace the suck.
So, this SEPA document is only for laying it out, isn't it? Is that right? It has nothing to do with the houses or anything, and it's just assumed that they're gonna follow the local rules, basically.
Well, this specific checklist was done in December. The I mean, the plat map was done in December, this SEPA checklist was done in June, so I would imagine that the rest of the documents that are there with the SEPA checklist were more detailed than this. But you'll notice none of the information in here talks about setbacks. It didn't talk about building heights. I think it said something like 35 feet. It's not
Yeah.
expected to be 35 feet. None of those houses are gonna be close to 35 feet though, really, right? So they're just kind of repeating back what the code allows. So you can say that, how is this, how is this property gonna be developed? Well, I'm gonna follow the setbacks, I'm gonna follow the height limitations.
That lets the people asking the questions know you know the answer.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, and it's harder to critique what you don't have in front of you versus what you do have. And most of the time, like the folks at City of Tumwater have done hundreds of these, so they know what they're looking for. I would ask about these species back in here, and I double check a bunch of online records to see if there's some type of wetland or I can't tell what the slope looks like on this. So this wouldn't be useful to me with at the SEPA level, so a lot of times SEPA would require, or pre-submittal would require a map with enough information that I can start making, I don't know, it looks flat, but it might not mean this is the total slope right here. Right?
It says it's a 3% slope. The checklist does. But which way?
So, yeah, you need, I think most of the time people are putting as much information on there as they can, unless there's something that they're, like if I know there's a wetland back here, if the applicant knew there's a wetland back here, they may not stick it on there. I just roll the dice and see what happens. And then the hard part is you have to figure out what that category is, to know what the buffer setback is, and the protection area is, in order to know what I can do with this property. And the hard part there is, that's your land, you don't want me, doing a wetland delineation, but it's your development, so.
And I need that done.
You need that done, so then there's this.
And then the county sets the actual buffer also,
Yeah.
so even after the delineation is done, the person who did the delineation can tell you what it's probably gonna be, but the county will be the one that sets it.
But, so have you done those?
I don't do a wetland, I've done a couple of them, not myself.
I don't know how that works, really, to be honest.
They have a table, but they do set it, I mean, they can set it.
But if you refuse to allow his wetland delineator to come on your property to figure out what the classification is, I think the county just makes, its best.
Educated guess, which could either be a benefit to the developer or not.
I'm just swagging that, though, I really don't know how to do that.
Okay.
I mean, there are other things that figure into it, like connectivity with other wetlands, things that you can determine,
Most of the time, if it's not on the National Wetland Inventory list, if there's no other indicators, they're not gonna do anything about it.
Yeah, if it's not on the county geodata, like wetland review layer, if you put that on, you have like a wetland layer for known delineated wetlands, and then the wetland review layer, which just says if you see that going through here, then you're definitely gonna have to do a delineation or
Sure.
whatever, make it through.
Very informative.
Cool.
So we would do SEPA checklists for comp plan updates,
Yeah.
and we would see them probably completed through the process with staff, when public hearings are presented, for quasi-judicial type decision making.
Yeah, we didn't talk at all about what the form looks like when you're all said and done. The DNS is usually like a sheet long determination of non-significance. So it'll be on letterhead, and it'll say like, hey, we got this application for this thing, we looked at the checklist, we deemed it non-significant, here's your comment period, here's your appeal period, this thing's final, right? The MDNS, the mitigated determination of non-significant, that'll be maybe more like, I don't know, you've probably seen those in staff reports before, but maybe like 3 pages, and so the middle pages will have all the conditions of, hey, if you do this, and you do this, and you do this, it will be non-significant.
everybody else had 16 mitigation factors anyway, so.
Right. So, yeah. So,
It's hard to argue against the process. The process is well thought out, it addresses the things you want to.
so you probably, it wouldn't be, you'd need to see the secret checklist along with the other application materials as part of a staff report packet. Is why it was worth spending time on this, because you'll be able to look at the plat map or the areas, and you'll be able to look at the secret checklist, and ideally, we wanna have if you wanted to ask me a question about something in the checklist, you can send that question to me, and we can chat about it, or you're welcome to raise it in a public setting in the hearing. So, don't email everybody and ask me. That's the only caveat. Because now we've just had a
We
meeting.
can't
Right.
go down to the landmark and talk about it.
Nope, nope, nope.
So did that cause more questions or clear a few things up? Too much detail, not enough detail?
Yeah, that
Oh,
was
yeah.
good.
I think the examples are helpful too.
Yeah.
It was really nice actually looking through a checklist, see the checklist, see the practical application.